We've heard a lot about social and affordable housing in the first half of the program today. We're now going to take a deeper dive into the planning, the development and the regulatory side of the vexing housing crisis that you're also bravely tackling today. I'd like to welcome back Adam Leto to the stage. He's going to get the second half of the program underway for us now, and I look forward to hearing some really good insights from Paul Scully today. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the second half of the program.
Thank you, Belinda. I've got the pleasure of introducing a man who I don't think really needs much of an introduction. Outside of the Premier and the Treasurer, arguably the most active and engaged ministers in Cabinet. Importantly, he's shown that he's not afraid to tackle the hard issues, and in an area where everyone has an opinion and everyone has an answer, as we've heard today. His authenticity, passion and leadership has certainly, I know, won him plenty of admirers. I know he won't mind me sharing this story, but I'll say that his interest and commitment in the planning and city space extends well beyond his recent appointment as Minister for Planning and Public Spaces. And his interest in understanding Western Sydney and supporting the growth of the region goes back just as far. The first time I met the Minister, he was a shadow minister and interested in going on a bit of a roadshow of the region, taking on a few of the sites, and which included places like Western Sydney Lakes and Jackie Vozza and Sydney Science Park and a few others. And I was in the car with our chairman, Christopher Brown, and he'll remember this story as well. But being the experts of all things in Greater Western Sydney, we told the Minister, don't worry about an address, we'll just follow us and we'll get you there. Turns out that was a bit of a mistake. Long story short, it was a 10-minute drive through Penrith. We ended up running in the back of privately owned farms, doing a couple of U-turns across Northern Road and watching the Minister in the rearview mirror, just sort of probably thinking, what the hell have I got myself into? Turns out that we weren't that great as Western Sydney travel guides. But I think the Minister has forgiven us, at least I hope so, and I think these days he's doing a pretty good job navigating Western Sydney by himself. So on that note, please welcome Minister for Planning and Public Spaces, Paul Scully.
Thanks very much for that introduction, Adam. Yes, it certainly was a longer journey than what we expected on the day. But nonetheless, we got there, and it gave me an opportunity to see a little bit more of Western Sydney. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd also like to recommit myself to doing everything in my power to add an Indigenous voice to our Constitution through the Voice referendum. I'm voting yes. But further than just October 14, to also make sure that we better incorporate Indigenous traditions and Indigenous communities into our planning and public spaces in New South Wales. I'd also like to acknowledge my parliamentary colleague, the member for Wallandilly, Judy Hannon, who's here today. And if anyone's looking for someone to blame for the reason why I'm on this stage, my former parliamentary leader, Luke Foley, who's here today. It's good to catch up with you, Luke. Thanks for inviting me to speak today. It's a fantastic opportunity to hear a range of views on the challenges we face and the opportunities that our initial plans that we've got to address housing affordability and availability. We inherited a difficult landscape with a planning system that was inefficient, confused and difficult to use. We had a planning system that was clunky and laden in red tape, too slow to react to the housing and other demands placed on a modern planning system, and that had to change. Under the former government, we had multiple ministers responsible for parts of the planning system, and at the time when I was a shadow minister, it struck me as really odd, given the importance of making sure the state's population is adequately housed, that communities are properly developed, that they have access to transport, job opportunities, healthcare, schools, that there was no clear responsibility for delivery. So the first step we did, we addressed that. One minister responsible for planning in New South Wales. For too long, the planning system in New South Wales had been reactive and didn't respond quickly enough to the emerging issues and trends around the delivery of housing, jobs and infrastructure across the state. And unfortunately, after many years of neglect and underinvestment, the Australian dream of owning your own home is becoming harder and harder to achieve. Even renting in an area we want to live is often out of reach. To put it simply, over the last decade or so, we haven't built enough homes. Not enough options are available from the choice of homes to match our diverse and growing population. There was more housing diversity in New South Wales in the 19th century than what there is on offer today. There's been a distinct lack of ambition and innovation in the past, and when it comes to housing and planning, and this government has said enough's enough. Now, I think many of you are aware the National Housing Accord targets have been revised recently with the expectation that 1.2 million new homes will be built across the country up until mid-2029. Now, that translates to a target in New South Wales of around 376,000 new dwellings. And while we need to increase the number of dwellings we're building now to make up for years of undersupply and to meet our Housing Accord commitments, we also need to make sure that we sustain that rate of growth beyond 2029 for New South Wales to remain an attractive place for people to live or move to as we compete in a global market for skilled people and investment. There's no end date on housing people in New South Wales. Now, already we've made some changes, including reducing the minimum lot size in which community housing providers and government housing providers can develop dual occupancies, introducing bonuses for private developers who include at least 15% affordable housing in their developments and giving a state significant development pathway. Establishing a new building commission to improve quality and continue to provide comfort and assurance to home buyers, and provided additional self-assessment powers to government agencies to support them to deliver more homes. Our earliest reforms recognise that while government agencies can and should be doing more to help deliver more homes, this alone will not fix the problem. The private sector will continue to deliver more than 90% of the new dwellings that we need, and the system needs to support that. But as a government works to improve the system, we expect industry to be working just as hard. As we push for more homes to be built, we don't want the industry to build rubbish. We understand the need to make a return, but its pursuit shouldn't overtake quality, reputation, or our collective responsibility to do the right thing, to provide housing for those who need it, to do it in the right way, to do it in a way that brings existing residents along with us, and which adds amenity in a way that stands the test of time. We're looking at reforms to improve the system, but we're also going to introduce measures to protect consumers looking to make the largest purchase they'll make in their lifetime. The Minns government is committed to confronting the housing crisis, and it was front and centre of this week's budget. It's been a busy week, but a great week. It is good to deliver a budget. It's so much better than sitting on the other side delivering a budget reply. After less than 6 months in office, we've delivered our first budget, the first Labor budget in New South Wales in 12 years. It was a budget of a mix of delivering on our election commitments, improving the budget bottom line, making the largest ever investment in schools and hospitals, particularly in Western Sydney, rebuilding our essential services, all without privatisations or an unfair wages cap, and while reducing the rate of growth in our debt. The fact that we've been able to curb debt growth means that to the tune of $14.8 billion next year, means that we've freed up $2 billion we would have paid in interest and redirected it to essential services and keeping the renewable energy roadmap on track. We've also been able to use some of those funds to invest in housing. Central to our plans is expanding housing supply. Over the last 5 years, less than half of Sydney local government areas met their housing targets. This built on earlier periods of undersupply. In the meantime, demand has grown with a combination of smaller household sizes and additional migration. That means we need to close the supply gap. The budget included measures to confront the housing crisis. Now, we're not suggesting for a moment that these are going to solve everything overnight, but we have to start somewhere. Including at our housing and infrastructure plan was $1.5 billion to build infrastructure such as roads, parks, hospitals and schools to support construction of new homes across Sydney, the Illawarra, the Central Coast and the Lower Hunter, funded through our infrastructure contribution reforms. A $400 million reserved in Restart for the new Housing Infrastructure Fund to deliver infrastructure that will increase housing supply across the state, including $100 million specifically reserved for regional New South Wales. Investing in infrastructure to support homes is important. As each of you know, you can't build a home without the local roads, water and sewer and drainage infrastructure in place. It was a major shortcoming of the previous government's efforts, where it rezoned land but didn't have a sustainable way to deliver the infrastructure needed to support it. In addition to these measures, we're also providing $300 million for Landcom to accelerate the construction of thousands of new homes above its existing targets, with 30% to be affordable housing. In fact, I was just saying to Alex, who's here today, and the Landcom team, I think over the last 3 days, Landcom's been mentioned in a positive light more times than it's been mentioned in the last decade, and that's a great thing. We're redirecting it to get Landcom to do what it does best, get people into homes. And Western Sydney is one of those examples of where Landcom has been doing that for years, since it was kicked off by the Rand Labor government. The sites targeted will be infill and government-owned sites. Landcom will also look at how it might be able to expand its build-to-rent pilots that is taking place on the South Coast and in the Northern Rivers. The use of the special dividend will produce almost 4,700 additional new homes. That's in addition to their original planning housing yield. That means in the 6-year period to ending 2028, Landcom will deliver more than 20,000 new homes. You contrast that with the last 6 years of the former government produced around 14,800 new homes. You can see the clear difference under this government. The budget also included the faster planning program, the start but certainly not the finish of planning reforms. It includes the Building Commissioner with $24 million to start that high quality housing to protect people from shoddy builds and shoddy builders. $9.1 million to assess housing supply opportunities on surplus government land identified through the government land audit that we're undertaking, and $5.6 million to introduce artificial intelligence into the planning system in New South Wales. Now, the AI project will support the development of rules of code, which is a process of taking legislation, regulations and policies and turning them into machine-readable codes so they can be understood and interpreted by computers. This will support planners, not replace them, in faster decision-making, compliance checking and service delivery. AI could also help identify problems with development applications before they're even submitted to the system. Improving the quality of original applications reduces the number of requests for further information. That saves time. For example, nearly 500 applications accepted through the Regional Flying Squad program in the past year. Additional information was required for around 30% of those proposals, with an applicants taking, on average, an additional 42 days to respond. Now, the combined savings of not having to request additional information on this relatively small group alone would be 6,300 days in the planning system. That's about 17 years for those doing the maths. If you expand that to what it does on a statewide system, the potential savings in terms of time are huge. This is without a broader application of AI to faster data analysis of transport, health and education needs to better reflect changing ways our communities move around and engage with services. Sydney is one of the 10 fastest growing cities in the developed world. It's the 48th among developed economies in terms of its size of its urban footprint, but it ranks 859th in the world for density, which places it among the least densely populated cities in the world. The message of that, we're not using our land well, and it's costing us. And more urban sprawl outwards, the more it costs to support homes with public transport, schools, parks, streets, pipes and wires. The New South Wales Productivity Commissioner released a report a few weeks ago that said sites double to quadruple costs to sprawl compared to filling in, leveraging and improving on what we already have. It's also costing our climate. The University of California research assessed different strategies to impact carbon emissions across 700 Californian cities. The study reviewed urban infill as a planning initiative among a range of other initiatives and found that in many cities, urban infill had the most significant impact on carbon emissions, more than EVs, reduced air travel or renewable energy. So we don't have a choice. We need density. It's the future of this city, especially around our transport hubs, existing infrastructure, and low-density suburbs that have the potential to take higher-density development. Now, the government's made no secret of its desire to see more infill development rather than simply expanding Sydney ever westward. Given that Sydney is a horseshoe shape, we start to run into very practical limitations on where we can build because of national parks and more flood-prone areas. When we went to the election with a deliberate approach of rebalancing housing growth around transport links, and we've been clear that we need to go up if we're going to accommodate our population growth. There's also a growing consumer preference for well-located homes close to jobs, amenity and transport, close to vibrant communities. Now, I've lived in detached dwellings, a townhouse, and now I think I'm the first planning minister to live in an apartment in a high-rise building. Now, I hasten to add, it's at the lowest level of the residential section. I couldn't afford the views. But while I've enjoyed each of the homes that I've lived in, I'm really enjoying apartment living. I'm around 400 metres from a train station, less from shops, restaurants and entertainment, about a kilometre from the electorate office, not that I get there much anymore. And it's a terrific location, convenient and lively. And as we build up, we must be mindful that we're also building communities. That's why part of our infrastructure reforms included reserving $1 billion for grants to local governments to support regionally significant facilities. The up doesn't always have to be 20 or 30-storey towers. It can be gentle density where suburbs are enhanced by adding density at what some describe a human scale. But I appreciate denser living is not for everyone. As an economist, I believe in consumer choice. Diversity of product makes economies tick. And while we'll be looking to rebalance growth to more up and out, there is still going to be some out. Greenfield development on the urban fringes will continue because there's already a great deal of it in the system. Upon assuming office in March, there are around 60,000 dwellings on greenfield sites in the development pipeline. There are additional rezoning proposals that remain under consideration, and that work will take several decades to complete. The homes, not the planning assessment, just for the record. We're fixing the planning assessment part. But it's easy to look at the housing problem through a political lens, a problem we've been left with and we must fix. And of course, I'm a politician, so I see that very, very clearly. But this is a generational issue. Frankly, it's an issue that, unless we fix it, will mean an entire generation of young people destined to rent, not own, at unaffordable levels. A limitation on Sydney's physical growth, which means a reduction in our economic dynamism and a talent outflow as our best young workers and young people give up and go somewhere else where they can get jobs and set up businesses, innovate and create. We'll add to climate change and the climate crisis by not building new fit-for-purpose homes with lower carbon footprints and lower costs to run. It's one of the reasons I'm so convinced that we have to stay the course in New South Wales on basics. So I repeat again, New South Wales has a date with density. While the measures we have already announced will assist, they are just the start. You'll be seeing more on how we fast-track approvals to turn Sydney around into a city that can sustain density of all kinds. The other thing we cannot escape is that we have a shared responsibility to achieve our ambitious goals. In that light, I would say to councils, listen to what young people want. They want well-located homes. They want density. They want vibrant, diverse communities, and we should welcome that. So work with us to create a future where young people have a choice to live near family, not one where they're forced to live with family. I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I look forward to Adam's questions. Hopefully, they direct things a bit better than he's driving. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Minister. The chairman has pulled me aside and wanted me to disclose in front of everyone, and yourself included, that I was the one navigating that day. He was just driving. So
Quick to correct, isn't
yes,
he?
he's thrown me under the bus, nice and quick. I've got a lot of questions that I've had people coming up to me and tap me on the shoulder and say, can you ask the Minister this, can you ask the Minister that? I've only got you for 15 minutes, so I'll try to get through as many as I can. It has been a big week, and I do want to touch on some of the things that came out of that budget, and obviously some of those things that you announced just then. But One of the things that we've heard today is around I think the message around certainty, and both in terms of policy and decision making, and more action, less talking. I get the irony given that we're spending half a day talking. That aside, what can you put on the table in terms of some short-term opportunities to get the quick wins, the low-hanging fruit when it comes to improving supply?
Sure. Well, look, it started with the most simple. There were literally at least 5 ministers with different responsibilities for planning in the system. That's way too much. I mean, who else has five people in their organisation controlling one part or responsible for one part? They don't. No one would set up a system that has that sort of oversight and that sort of responsibility. What it meant is that everyone could point the finger at each other when delivery wasn't happening. So that was the first thing we absolutely had to do. We've appointed Kirsten Fishburn as the new secretary of the department. I think that's one that's been welcome across the board. She's fantastic. So that's added a dynamism. We've taken, any change of government has a whole host of changes. The machinery of government changes. And they're all the stuff that's, a bit like the electrical and plumbing work. It's behind the wall, you don't see it, but it's really, really important. And it sets a direction for government. So there's that process. And that process, unfortunately, takes a bit of time. It's a big machine. I mean, the New South Wales government is the largest employer in the Southern Hemisphere. But we've set things up. We've made changes to the Greater Cities Commission, changes to the Western Parkland City Authority to bring the planners and the staff back into planning so that they can get on with the tasks focused on delivery. Still with those 2 agencies at the highest level doing their job. We've still got an airport, a city around an airport to deliver. We've still got strategic planning to do in Sydney. We've made some early changes. They were particularly focused on the arms and the delivery agencies or the housing delivery agencies of government. And I'm sure Minister Jackson would have touched on some of those this morning. But getting Landcom back into the game. Right, getting Landcom back into the game is an important part. And while I said that they may have been mentioned more times in the last few days than they have been in the last decade, that's actually very deliberate. They've done a great job in their various iterations since the Rand government. We wanted to do more. So there's those sorts of things that have happened already. It's a big ship to turn around. We've got more to come. So you'll hold on tight. There's more happening.
One of the initiatives you mentioned, which I think was widely received at the time, was the 30% uplift for 15% social. There's still a question mark in terms of the review. I know there's a review going on around that. Can you give us a status on that? And the other question I had was in terms of extending beyond LEPs, which I know was the question that a lot of the industry had. Would that apply to normal LEPs, or would this have to sit within that blanket?
So we should see something in a bit more of the public domain shortly on that. We're hoping to get that locked away in the next couple of months so people can get on and use those or try and explore those bonuses and try and use that additional planning pathway. The important thing about that is that we actually want the delivery of both the affordable and the market homes. You can't do one without the other in this circumstance. We want people to have a look at where they might be able to use that. A lot of people have contacted me and contacted the office keen to get involved in that. So look, you should see something shortly. Something came across my desk the other day. There's some elements there that we want to work through on the practical side of things to actually make sure it can work. There's no point coming up with these grand schemes if they don't end up delivering the housing that we want out of it, and that's the important part of it.
You mentioned it's been a big week for you and the state government. It's also been a big week in Victoria. We've heard a lot about their housing package, and it's been fairly widely supported and well received. I don't like giving too much credit to the Victorians, but having said that, what are your thoughts on what they've introduced? It seems practical, it seems sensible, and has the support of industry. Are there anything within that you'd like to pinch or replicate, or generally, what are your views on it?
I have to confess, the first time I had an opportunity to have a decent look at it was in the car on the way up here. I've been a little distracted this week by some other documents that have been floating around the Parliament. But nonetheless, I did have a look at it. There's some interesting stuff in there. There's some interesting stuff that looks a lot like some of the things we're already doing in New South Wales. a lot of the things in terms of some of the planning stuff, a lot of the things in terms of some of the rental stuff are things that we're already on the way to introducing, and I'm sure Minister Jackson would have touched on some of those earlier. Look, what it shows though is that you've got jurisdictions and governments who are serious about getting on with this task, and I think that's the important signal. Now, as I indicated earlier, we're going to have more things coming down the pipeline. There's obviously a lot of detail that needs to be worked through with some of these sort of things. So, don't think that what we've said so far is the end for things. I genuinely want that dynamic planning system that will work and continue to work. There's a lot of focus on the housing accord targets. Absolutely, we absolutely need to meet those or do everything humanly possible to get there. But we want the machine to continue going along after 2029 because Sydney's still going to be and still should be a really attractive destination for people to move to or to continue to live in. And I was serious about the comment at the end where we want young people to be able to live near their families, not continue to have to live with their families. And that's an important thing. And that arrangement stretches not only to Greater Sydney, but along the 6 cities agglomeration, but also into regional New South Wales. We've seen challenges in all of those markets, big increases in prices in all of those markets, big increases in rent in all of those markets, long waiting lists for social housing in all of those markets. So we've got a task in front of us. I'll be having a closer look, but yeah, this week I've been a little preoccupied, I have to say.
Understand that. You mentioned the focus on development around train stations, and there was a piece this week around the Hills and the mayor there, and voicing council's concern with future development around the metro station in the Hills. You're going to come up against communities, councils that are opposed to development. I mentioned Rose's position and comments earlier in the year about get out of the way, and she contextualised that, which is great. What's your views on being able to work with councils and communities that may not have the same view that current state government has?
Look, I've been really heartened by the number of mayors particularly, and councillors who have approached me at various functions, much like this one, and have said, yeah, we're willing to work with you. We want to get in. They understand. They want to build vibrant communities as well. They want to welcome people to their areas, And sure, there are going to be people, particularly over the, in the lead up to local government elections, who will want to do some political grandstanding for their own election. But I say to them again, think of what younger people want. Think of what the diverse, the vibrant communities that young people want to move into. Let's not continue to lose. Like over the last couple of years, we've lost record numbers of people in New South Wales to other states. And they weren't just, some of the migrant communities who might move here from overseas and then move further afield in the future. People have bailed out on Sydney. We start to lose talent when that happens. We start to lose the people who are going to create businesses, employ people into the future, run the local PNC, the football club, all of those sort of things. So, I'm genuine in my appeal to councils. Let's work together on how we can do this better, because I think there's a bunch of people out there who really want to make sure this happens because, as I say, they want to live near their family, not with their family forever.
Both you and Minister Jackson mentioned the importance of sustainability, not so much in terms of just sustainability of supply and making sure that this is an ongoing stream of supply coming through, but also from an environmental lens, making sure that it meets the amenity and local needs of the area. One of the policies that was introduced under the former government, Minister Stokes, the design set, which I'm sure many people in the room were keen to see the back of. There were elements of that which did work for Western Sydney. Have you had a chance to review that, or what's the current government's position in terms of making sure that there's a sustainability agenda that's attached to all this development?
Well, you're right. There were elements of it that people actually welcomed. And, I think there was a bit of throwing the baby out with the bathwater in terms of that. And in fact, the previous government, after they said that they weren't going to do the design and play set, quietly did introduce elements of it, most particularly the sustainable housing set and the basics changes. We're sticking with those. we've changed the transition arrangement a little bit just to reflect some current conditions and some elements, but that was put in place by the previous government in August 2022, so it's been around a while. But look, we have an absolute commitment to net zero by 2050. Now, in the built environment, as you would all know, the built environment accounts for about 17% of our emissions. That is after you take stationary energy generation and then vehicle transport emissions, it's the next biggest one. I used to work for the University of Wollongong, and part of it there was I used to look after the Sustainable Buildings Research Centre. It was about retrofitting existing buildings because there's only about 2% of buildings in any given year in Australia that get knocked over and rebuilt. So we've got a huge retrofitting task to do on some of this sort of stuff. We've got a huge task in terms of making sure that we're reducing the embodied carbon as well as reducing the operating carbon in the built environment. We've got a massive challenge in the planning system to make sure that we're delivering renewable energy as we do it. That's why part of the budget process was getting that renewable energy roadmap back on track, adding money to the transmission work, setting up the Energy Security Corporation and working with Energy Co to make sure that we're getting renewable energy into the system as quickly as we've got coal fire coming off, and in order to meet our commitments around 2030 and beyond. So it is absolutely one of the focuses of the government. It ranks in the sort of top four: housing, essential services, renewable energy roadmap, getting rid of the debt.
One final one before we wrap up. One of the key messages that come out of today is that it's not just about building the homes, but building communities. And these things require access to transport links, the right amenity, parks, hospitals, services, all of those things. For that to work, your role, and I think the role of the department, needs to extend across all of government, across all of those different agencies. Do you feel confident that there's enough buy-in and coordination across those agencies for it to work? And if not, what do you think needs to happen? I know Christopher's mentioned the Coordinator General a couple of times today, but that aside, how do all the pieces fit together?
Well, it's the great joy of a new development and a new government rather, and some changes in key appointments that we're able to get things working in a different way, and perhaps some of the old battles of previous governments that build up over time aren't there anymore. There was very few of us in opposition, so we had to work well together, and I guess we continue to work well together as a cabinet, and we're trying to instill that attitude, that cultural change into the senior levels of department and flowing down. I've got a planning secretary who used to be senior in transport, knows that system very, very well, was the CEO of Liverpool City Council. I'm pretty sure Ned misses her. No, apologies, John. But she was very, very good, highly respected there, but she understands those key components. Josh Murray has been unfortunately criticised, but his appointment is a very, very good one in transport. So we've got some of those key appointments. We'll have a separation of the climate change and energy parts from the Department of Planning and Environment, and renaming of that from the 1st of January. That'll get all about delivery focus in our department, but the new secretary there will be working very closely with us. And there's some mechanisms within government that have come to the fore, which I think will start to bear fruit. But Kirsten's a force to be reckoned with within government. So I think between a lot of us, we'll get there.
On that note, I'll leave it there. Minister Scully, thank you for your time. I know it's been a big week, so I appreciate your time today. I think it was this time a year ago where, as Opposition Leader, Chris Minns went up at stage at our Boomtown event and singled you out and stood you up and said,
I recall.
This is the bloke you need to point the finger at, and you've not shied away from the challenge, mate, so I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everyone.